Let's do a microphone check. So okay? All right, wonderful. Okay. Right. Okay. So first of all, I'm very glad to be here. I made it all the way from New Zealand, and my luggage unfortunately didn't. So I had to go on shopping yesterday. I went to the shopping center and I bought this very nice shirt from a shop you probably all know. It's called Hitler and Mussolini. In any case, I would like to first talk probably a little bit about me, because probably you don't know me. My career has taken me a bit around the world. I've authored by now more than 170 papers and disclosures a couple of years ago, because I was really curious about how it all works and I just wanted to find out. And anyway, so I started off working for Lego in Denmark. So I spent a good year in Billund. And during that time I also came to Stockholm a couple of times. I had some very good time here, and I still have every time I return. I then moved on to Philips Research in the Netherlands. I'm making a shortcut here, there were some steps in between. But I was working for Philips Research, and there's a company, of course, that sells products, very closed, very much focused on, hey, let's get as much patents out as we can and try to charge everybody else for it. I then moved on to the Eindhoven University of Technology in the Netherlands, where I was then becoming a proper academic, doing all the scientific research that you do. And then I moved on to New Zealand, where I'm now an associate professor at the HIT Lab. And the HIT Lab is a university organization, and we're doing academic stuff, but we're also supposed to have a little bit of emphasis on collaborating with companies. So we do a lot of work with companies as well. So maybe it's a little bit less academic than before. So sort of in terms of the gradient, I think I've kind of covered the ground from being completely commercial to being completely academic. Now, I was just triggered off by previous presentation in terms of how it all comes together. So I just quickly copied one of my old figures together and kind of like explaining a bit the landmarker of how it works. So because you've talked a lot about like the scientist, who's just analyzing, and the creative person who's all kind of creating the previously unknown. So the way I map it out is like this. So when you have engineers, they typically have a focus on technology, certainly. And then what makes them different, let's say, from scientists and designers. Scientists being here really natural scientists, or it depends on which country you've come from. They've got different kind of names for that. And the scientist himself is predominantly interested in the understanding of the world, whereas, let's say, engineers and designers are predominantly interested in transforming the world into a new state. And what makes a designer different from an engineer and a scientist is that a designer has, engineers and scientists have explicit knowledge. They can actually know the knowledge they have. They can actually externalize into a paper, into a mathematical formula that designers usually cannot. Their knowledge is intuitive. And if you ask them, so how do you do it and how does it work? Oh, I don't know. It's like the Beatles. They couldn't explain how they do it. They just do it. But anyway, that's a bit of a sidetrack. What I really wanted to talk about is, I'm not sure how much you know about the politics of New Zealand. Probably you read our newspapers every day. This is the Honourable Steve Joyce, Minister for Everything, as I call him. And he has essentially a problem. He wants New Zealand to grow. He wants the economy to run and everybody to earn lots of money, because if that happens, he can get re-elected. The interesting thing is that this organization that he's now heading is called MBIA, Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. Is actually a merger of, I think, 4 or 5 different ministries that put together, including a Ministry of Science and Innovation we used to have. We no longer have that. We only have the Ministry of Everything. And the word science was actually completely stripped from the name. And what you see, this is kind of symptomatic right now, that science is really being put under the kind of Right? It's becoming a subordinate, really, to commercial interests. So Steve Jobs, essentially, that's his problem. You know, he wants a society problem, everybody giving a job, having a lot of money, that's his problem. And then you've got this universities, and he's pulling millions of dollars go into these universities. And what is coming out of it? You know, we usually, when you do a business transaction, you know, you give somebody some money, and then you want something back. And these universities, well, what do they deliver? Like graduates, okay, we can count that, and that might be good, but that's not really what we're after. What the minister wants really is like, oh, all these universities, all these smart people, they should really help grow the economy by helping our companies making better products, grow more sheep, export more milk. There's this kind of old joke that if New Zealand would have actually if Taiwan had followed the investment plan of New Zealand, then Taiwan today would be the best producer of rice. Now, the issue, of course, is that he does not directly have so much influence on what the university actually does. There's still this concept of academic freedom where, you know, you can't exactly tell a scientist what he's supposed to do. So by now we've gone much more sophisticated in playing this kind of games. And so what they do is essentially the carrot and the stick. Whereas the carrot, for example, is this one. The University of Canterbury in 2000, or Canterbury in general, the Christchurch, the city, had a devastating earthquake in 2010. So approximately 9,000 buildings, you know, are going to be demolished or are already demolished. And the university suffered as well, so we lost a couple of buildings that we cannot use anymore. And it took approximately 2 years for negotiation, and they'd have the business plan and all sort of things before then the university actually, the government decided, okay, yeah, we're going to help you a little bit, you know, with this disaster, because otherwise we're bankrupt anyway. But so what they said is like, okay, we're going to give you $260 million, but only for science and engineering. So, science and engineering right now is getting new buildings, the arts, College of Education, and others, nothing. So this is then how essentially influence takes place. And of course, the university would not never say no to this, you know, because hey, they're giving us money, so what are we going to do about it? Now, so this is slightly more sophisticated. And it's also, I guess, worthwhile mentioning that the only money we got are for buildings. We're not allowed to hire anybody. Which again is kind of, what is the heart of a university? You know, is it the people in it, or is it the walls? And apparently, you know, the walls are more important than the people. Now, well, it goes even further. We have some more interesting ideas about how science should be conducted. So approximately 4 years ago, the government had another brilliant idea and said like, oh, you know, all these scientists, you know, they all do this kind of ivory tower research that doesn't really help the society. You know, I tell you what, actually the society should decide what scientists are supposed to do. So they came up with a national science challenge where everybody really in New Zealand had the opportunity to make a submission about what scientists are supposed to do. Now, that was of course very interesting. And the problem, of course, there is, you know, a lot of people don't necessarily know what is known. You know, they haven't read the literature. They don't really know. And to be quite honest, I mean, they're not alone. As a matter of fact, you know, actually, what came out of it by now, the stage we're at right now, is that the only thing they could ever agree upon on the challenge, like to enhance New Zealand's capacity to use physical science engineers for economic growth, this is the abstraction level what everybody could agree on, which is pretty much an empty shell. So, in my view, the whole process has miserably failed. But coming back to the question about, you know, not knowing what we're doing, I mean, the scientists and engineers themselves, we do not know what we do. And that is essential to it. If we would know what we're doing, it wouldn't be science, it wouldn't be research. If we could predict the outcome, it would not be interesting. That's the whole point. And of course, this type of ignorance is different from the ignorance that you find, let's say, from people in the street. Because we actually know what we don't know. And that is something else than just being not knowledgeable. Now, what then usually happens is that the university sets up this competitive, collaborative funding. So the idea is that now we've got a call, and then everybody's supposed to submit their papers and proposals for applying for grant money, and then some very few are being selected. Now, this mechanism might sound like a good idea, but in a way, I suspect that the predominantly greatest benefit of this kind of scheme is that the government can actually really nicely and easily reduce the amount of funding available. Because if anybody ever comes up and says, hey, I didn't get any money, how am I supposed to do my research? They say, well, that's your problem. You're just not a good researcher. If you were a good researcher, then you would have received some money. Now, the fact that there's just not enough money to go around for everybody, that is just being completely ignored. So it's a very, very smart way of cutting costs, really. And that holds true actually not just on the individual level of the individual researcher, but of course on the university level as well. So every year, of course, the university sits together and says, okay, how many grants do we get? And then they come to the conclusion, wow, we didn't receive more, we received less money than last year. And then when we go to the government and say, well, you're cutting our money, and they say, no, we didn't cut your money. The other universities were just better than you. Now, right. But of course, the university is occasionally full of smart people, and they of course also figured something out. And it's like, hey, wait a minute, we've got like the best, smartest people of society here, and they're really, really smart, and they're most certainly the best dressed people, huh? So why don't these guys go off inventing? Why can't they create all these great intellectual property things, and then we patent them, So, for example, one of my previous employer, the Eindhoven University of Technology, they claim all IP of whoever works there, and also of all the students. Anything that happens there, university says, it's ours. And the hope, of course, is that something useful comes out of it, and they make lots of money. So then they come up with the technology transfer offices, where you're supposed to then file your invention disclosure, and then they assess it. How valuable is it? And if they think it's valuable, they get a patent onto it. And then, of course, Google is just waiting to pick up this license and pay you millions of dollars. That's the idea. Now, in practice, I've been digging around a bit, and these are the two numbers that I could find from my own universities I worked for in the past. So we have UC has around 12,000 students, 726 academics. I think the number for Eindhoven, I think the PhD students are actually considered academics at that time, so it's different. So in the last 2 years, it's 2014. So there was 11 inventions, and they were able to sell 2 licenses, while at the same time they produced thousands of papers. So obviously, something is not really going to plan. And then, if you look at this, from those 2 license deals, you cannot cover the costs of a technology transfer office. They're running a deficit, a big one. And I went through some literature, and they actually tried to investigate it. And that's true. The vast majority of technology transfer offices are not financially viable. Now, why then should we bother? Here's another statistic that I found, and this is actually nice for Sweden as well, because it actually includes Swedish numbers. So from all the professors that are there, those that actually did an invention is around 4%. So 3 to 4% of academics actually appear to be also patenting. And that's, in my view, is a very low number. And that might indicate that there's a problem, although I'm not so quite sure about that. If you look out, like how's it spread out over the disciplines, you see in recent years it's particularly biotech that's kicking in. Biotech is the big driver, together with essentially electronics and instrumentations. Now, if you look at who actually owns these patents, then if you look at Sweden, it's 82% of patents are owned by companies. And what this indicates is really that a lot of companies might work with universities on certain projects, but then the IP goes straight to the company. The university does not hold on to it and tries to sell it. The basic understanding is if we have a research contract, you pay us, the company pays the university some money, then the assumption is that all the IP goes essentially to the company. Interesting enough, there's also 13.8% here that in Sweden actually is owned by individuals, and that is, I guess, you. So congratulations, you're doing pretty well. In my humble view, is this kind of IP game for academia is not working, at least not in Europe. The numbers for the US are slightly different, but there the universities do actually file more patents. Whether that translates into additional profit awaits to be seen. And of course, you always have these examples of MIT and Stanford who rake in millions of dollars this way. And everybody thinks, oh, we should do the same thing. But of course, it just doesn't work. We are not MIT, we are not Stanford, and it just doesn't really translate very well. Now, oops, how do I go back? Okay. So in a way, you almost think that, that the technology transfer between universities and society is failing completely. But, and that is what I mentioned, or I was hinting at previously already, that is only if you look at patents. And of course, administrators love looking at easy numbers. They like to quantify things. And if they can just count the number of patents, that makes their life much easier. But the transfer of knowledge is much more rich and much more diverse than, and escapes very often their ability to count. So, for example, publications. The 3,000 publications that come out, that are then being read or are available to everybody to read. That's an excellent form of technology transfer. The graduates that are being produced and then gain their knowledge, go into industry and apply their knowledge in industry, or even start up their own company. So there are a lot of things like this happening, and it's just not very easy to count. And I think that's probably part of the problem here. It's not easy to count, and therefore administrators have a difficult issue with this. But it certainly does happen. Now, another issue that you of course see is like when you take products, you don't necessarily see, how they came together. So in scientific writing, if I publish an article, I always put my references in there, whatever somebody said before, what this is based on, and that's a whole line of argumentation. Such a thing does not exist for products. Sometimes for marketing purposes, they put in the package, patent pending, or based on this patent, blah, 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 but very rarely, really. So what I might propose is that instead of, having that sort of like the ingredient list coming up, what's this going on? Because I see it, do you see anything? Okay, that is wrecked, and that's already... Now, so much for technology. Nice. So let's try one more time. No, never mind, so it's not so bad. It's just a can of Coke, and I replace essentially a list of ingredients with scientific papers about, you could actually put the knowledge that the product is based upon on the package, that you can actually trace it back. And that way, you actually increase the transparency. But one of the problems, of course, that we have is that it's purely about incentives. Now, why is it all these academics push their knowledge into papers instead of into patents? And there's also, I think there's a good reason for that, actually. Now, why should I, as a scientist, who is being paid by taxpayers, take my knowledge and lock it away? That doesn't make any sense. Why should I, when I'm being paid by the public, not give back to the public by simply publishing it? That makes a lot of sense to me. And the market forces then actually almost urge the companies to pick up on this. If a certain new piece of technology is available, it is published, and it does not necessarily require an enormous investment, then the companies will be, just by market pressure, will be forced to build it into their products. So I think that's a very, very a good way forward. And the IP strategy that some universities, for example Eindhoven, run, where they just claim everything and hold on to it for no particular reason, and certainly not for their financial benefit, is actually inhibiting innovation. It's standing in the way. Holding on to it under the fear that you might lose something if you give it away, it's just silly. Some universities in the US actually moved completely away from that because they realized the trouble that they give their students in starting up their companies outweigh by far the potential money they get as donations from those companies later on. It's not helpful. Most license deals, you just don't get a lot of money from them. It's not worth it. So let the students go, let them start their companies. And in terms of the incentives, since we're in Stockholm, I had to bring this up, Nobel Prize. So originally, the Nobel Prize in the testimony, it actually says that the prize for physics should be given to the best discovery or invention of the past year. Now, Nobel never said in terms of the ratio how it should be, and so in that sense you can't really claim now it should be this or should be that. But we kind of ranked it out in terms of like, oh, how did it actually go? Now, how many inventions did actually receive a Nobel Prize? It wasn't very much. There was a clear emphasis on discovery. Now, maybe you want to say, okay, this is actually a prize for scientists, so why bother? Maybe we should, maybe there are other prizes for inventors that are even better than that, But clearly, for scientists, discoveries is what you're supposed to be doing. Now, in my view, if you have an idea and you want to turn that into a product, it takes commitment and expertise. And an academic might actually have both of those things. But if an academic wanted a commercial career, if we wanted to become rich and have a company, we would have done that a long time ago. A lot of people in academia have chosen this path because they like this type of work. So this pressure that's now being built up by all the academics, oh, why don't you invent something? They now gave us little plaques called innovation champions and all sorts of stuff. A lot of pressure is being put onto the academics to be inventors. And I think this is wrong. Because if all the academics suddenly start, filing IP, starting their companies, and then put all the energy into that, and wouldn't eventually leave the university, there'd be no academics left. It's silly. So academics cannot be the ones that bring ideas to the product, to the market. And the technology transfer office is usually also not the right place because they don't lack the expertise. If they want to evaluate a proposal, they actually have to find some sort of consultancy that deals with it. So in that sense, in a way, universities are almost like patent trolls. They create IP, hold on to it, but they never do anything with it. They're not a company that can turn that into a product and sell it. They're just hoping for somebody, to pay up for it. And at least, the only thing I guess that distinguishes them still from patent trolls is they don't actively go out and sue everybody. But that might happen actually pretty soon. So in my view, it is the graduates. The graduates is the key. It is the graduates that can come up with an idea while doing the studies. They might have some interesting thing going on. They might experiment with this idea in the framework of the freedom of academia. And then they go out and they go for it. They have the commitment, they have the expertise, and they have the opportunity. And the IP policy of TUE is inhibiting this. It's an example of actually inhibiting innovation. So, why then does it fail? Why does innovation at academia fail? And a couple of reasons or what should I say? It's a bit about this tremendous difference between how the university sees its purpose and its goals versus what the politicians actually wanted to do. And I've been long asking myself, how could this be so misaligned? How could it be so different? And I had to actually go back a little bit into philosophy to find out. And if we look at there's something called the Metaphysics of Quality by Robert Pirsig, and he kind of divided up the world into 4 different quality patterns, where you have intellectual, social, biological, and inorganic levels. So just to give you a few examples, at the intellectual level, that would be science, philosophy, math. You have a social level, which is family, church, government. Biology, senses of touch and smell, of hearing, and then of course for the inorganic, it's just the raw dimensions of it. And each of these, it's not coincidental. They're put on top of each other. There's a hierarchy here, based on the evolution in terms of where in the evolution did they start it off. Now, the example that I want to illustrate is that a tree. So a tree is an organic form, biological, and it stands above the inorganic. So the pattern of a tree is not in the soil. The soil itself cannot produce a tree. That's not it. It is something else than the ground. And the tree essentially grows on top of it. And it's almost it's actually alien to the ground. It actually devours the ground. It takes advantage of the ground. It sucks out the water. It sucks out the minerals for its own sustaining. And that is all right. It would actually be immoral to kill the tree to preserve the sand. It doesn't make any sense. Now, but the important thing is that the tree cannot come out of soil. And the same thing holds true for society and intellect. So the biological man does not create society any more than the soil creates the tree. The pattern of the tree is dependent upon the minerals, so there's definitely, you need them, but the tree itself is a superior pattern, and it's hostile to the soil. It exploits the soil. And the same kind of structure also happens between intellectual and society. Society cannot create intellect. It doesn't understand it. Intellectual level depends on the society for its existence. But it is ultimately superior. Now, it is better for an idea to destroy society than for society to destroy an idea. And we might think, okay, but it's kind of like this big battle between science and church. It's a long time ago. I mean, let's take Galileo. That's the prime example, where truth was actually defined by church, and it was Galileo who kind of freed it from it to some degree. Now, but that's not over. Just recently, I'm not sure who did that. Did anybody watch that big debate? Bill Nye, the science guy, versus Ken Ham, on essentially. Ken Ham is one of the persons who defends the worldview that the Earth is 5,000 years old, and that everything that is to be known actually is written in the Bible, and there was a flood, and he defends all of these things, and he's trying to do it from a scientific perspective, which makes it even more interesting. Anyway, huge debate still ongoing. If we currently look at the debate about vaccination, why are we having this debate again? Crazy, So the whole fight between the intellectual and societal level is not fought out. We're still fighting. And in this debate, it was an interesting comment. There was a question from the audience, and it was like, if and however would you change your mind? And now I said, we would just need one piece of evidence, and I would change my mind. That was his answer. Ham said, hey, I know the truth. It's in the Bible. I can't change it. It's God-given. No way I can change my point of view. Very, very interesting. Now, more down-to-earth example. David Kern of Brown University. Now, interestingly, he was working with a company called Microfibers. And they did some consultancy because some of the workers there, they had some sort of lung problem, and he started to investigate. And over time, he realized, wow, there's something really going wrong here. There's actually a real disease developing here. And he wanted to publish about it. And the company said, no, you signed an NDA. You're not going to tell anybody what you found. And he's like, well, but, it's an illness. This is really serious stuff here. And eventually, he actually went out and he published it. What happened next? Brown University stripped him of all his money. They closed down his research lab and put pressure on him. There you see it. Truth versus societal need. And it still happens. So this kind of battle is still ongoing and hasn't been won. So, in conclusion, science is important, but it is not the golden key, the golden ticket to solve all of the problems of society. The pattern of science is different. You cannot solve all the problems of the soil with a tree. It's just something else. And it is superior. And it's just the way it is. Science is independent and superior to society. But the idea that scientists are not interested in the well-being of society is also wrong. We're very much interested in the well-being of society. And the idea that, our minister thinks that we need to be told what to do is wrong. We actually, by our own nature, are interested to make life and our planet a better place to be. So the whole intellectual property game, in a way, is unsuitable for university. Universities are not companies. We don't try, and we shouldn't try to act like a company. The inventions that are happening should actually be executed by our graduates, and they should actually turn these inventions into products. And here's the kind of thing, here's the take-home message, is that science and innovation are unpredictable, fundamentally unpredictable. And that is the reason why Steve Jobs is so unhappy with us. He says, I'll give you $100 million, and I want a return of investment of 200,000, and we're supposed to promise that. But we can't. Well, we write it into our proposals anyway, and words are cheap, but actually getting it to work is a whole different story. And every attempt to actually control that by giving guidance or by saying, okay, you can only research this or you can only research that, is actually counterproductive. Any kind of attempts to lock in IP and be all kind of tied up about it is counterproductive. The free flow of ideas is something good and necessary for science, and that is what helps it progress. The funny thing about information is that it becomes more valuable the more it is shared. So by locking it in, you actually reduce its value. And that's it for me. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open to any questions that you might have.